Everyone talks about Australia like a destination, beaches, weather, freedom. But after living here for a while, Americans realize Australia does something else quietly. It reshapes daily thinking without asking permission. There is no moment where you notice it happening. One day you wake up and realize life feels different, and you struggle to explain why. The change isn't visible in photographs or easy to describe in messages back home. It's internal, gradual, and so subtle that most Americans don't recognize it until they're already transformed by it. They came for adventure, or opportunity, or escape, but what they get is something entirely different. A recalibration of how they process their days, measure their worth, and define what matters. This isn't the story people expect when they move to Australia. It's not about koalas or surf culture or saying mate convincingly. It's about how a place can quietly dismantle the framework you brought with you and replace it with something you never knew you needed. The shift feels so natural that it's almost invisible while it's happening, which is precisely what makes it so powerful and so difficult to reverse once it takes hold. Americans who return home often describe feeling out of sync, not because they've become Australian, but because Australia changed the lens through which they see everything, and that lens doesn't fit their old environment anymore, leaving them caught between two worlds without fully belonging to either one again. At the beginning, everything feels fresh. Every walk feels intentional. Every weekend feels like a reward. Americans often think this feeling will fade fast, but it does not disappear. Instead, it settles. The excitement turns into comfort. What surprises people is how normal this comfort starts to feel, and how hard it becomes to imagine going back to constant pressure. The honeymoon period follows its expected arc: intense joy, frequent discoveries, constant photo documentation. But what comes after surprises most Americans. Instead of settling into disappointment or boredom, they settle into something that feels deeply right. The beach stops being exotic and becomes simply accessible. The relaxed pace stops feeling like vacation and becomes baseline reality. The space between obligations stops feeling wasteful and starts feeling necessary. Americans expect to eventually miss the intensity they left behind, the constant stimulation and endless options and perpetual motion. But months pass and that longing doesn't arrive. Instead, they notice they're sleeping better, breathing deeper, thinking more clearly. The comfort isn't complacency. It's relief from a pressure they didn't fully recognize they were carrying until it lifted. This phase confuses many Americans because it contradicts what they've been taught about ambition and growth and pushing boundaries. They wonder if they're becoming soft, losing their edge, settling for less than they should. But over time, most realize they're not losing anything essential. They're gaining something they didn't know was missing: permission to exist without constantly proving their worth through achievement and productivity. Over time, daily life slows in a way Americans do not expect. Not slower movement, but slower thinking. Fewer rushed decisions. Fewer loud moments. People take their time without explaining themselves. This changes how Americans plan their days. Small choices start to matter more than constant ambition. The mental shift is what catches Americans off guard. They're used to operating at a certain cognitive speed, constantly processing multiple streams of information, making rapid decisions, optimizing efficiency. But Australia doesn't reward that approach the same way. The culture values thoroughness over speed, presence over productivity, quality over quantity. Americans find themselves actually finishing conversations instead of planning their next response while someone else is speaking. They discover they can eat lunch without checking their phones or scrolling through messages. They realize meetings can end without immediately rushing to the next obligation. None of this happens because they consciously decided to change. It happens because the environment around them simply doesn't reinforce the urgency they brought with them. Without constant reinforcement, those patterns start to fade. The mental space that opens up feels strange at first, almost empty, like something is missing. Americans often describe it as unsettling until they realize it's not emptiness but spaciousness. Room to think more deeply instead of constantly reacting. This cognitive shift transforms how they approach problems, make decisions, and evaluate options. They become less reactive, more reflective, willing to sit with uncertainty rather than forcing premature resolution just to maintain momentum and feel productive. Work still matters, but it no longer defines the entire day. Many Americans notice evenings feel longer. Weekends feel protected. There is less guilt around rest. This balance does not feel forced, it feels built into daily life. That realization often becomes one of the hardest things to unlearn later. The shift in work-life relationship is fundamental, not superficial. Americans are accustomed to work expanding to fill available time, to checking emails at night and on weekends, to measuring their worth through professional achievement and productivity. But Australian culture operates differently. Work has boundaries that people actually respect. Colleagues leave on time without apology or elaborate explanation. Taking vacation is normal, not something requiring justification. Professional success exists, but it doesn't require sacrificing everything else. Americans initially struggle with this because their identity is often deeply wrapped up in their work. When work no longer consumes their days and thoughts, they face an uncomfortable question. Who are they when they're not working? What gives their life meaning and structure when career achievement isn't the primary organizing principle? This identity crisis can be intense, pushing Americans to confront values and priorities they never questioned before. But for those who move through this discomfort, what emerges is often a more integrated sense of self, one where work matters but doesn't dominate, where professional achievement is valued but doesn't define worth, where productivity is important but doesn't determine whether a day was meaningful. This recalibration of the work-life relationship is one of the most profound adjustments Americans experience in Australia, and it's often the change they miss most intensely when they return to environments that don't support that balance naturally. After living in Australia for a while, Americans notice social life feels lighter. Conversations move without pressure. People listen without rushing to respond. Friendships grow through shared time, not constant effort. This surprises many Americans who expect energy and intensity to drive connection. Over time, relationships feel steady and grounded, built on presence rather than performance. The social adjustment takes longer than Americans expect because it requires unlearning patterns they didn't know were patterns. Americans are often socialized to perform in conversations, to be interesting, engaging, quick-witted, always contributing something valuable. Australian social culture is more understated. Silence is comfortable. Conversations can meander without reaching conclusions. People can spend time together without it needing to be particularly memorable or significant. This relaxed approach to connection initially feels flat to many Americans. They wonder if people actually like them or if everyone is just politely tolerant. The signals are subtler, the pace slower, the intensity lower. But over time, Americans often discover these relationships have a different quality. They're more sustainable, less exhausting, built on genuine compatibility rather than forced chemistry. Friendships develop through repeated low-key interactions rather than intense bonding experiences. Someone becomes a close friend gradually, almost imperceptibly, through months of casual beach walks or backyard barbecues or simple afternoons doing nothing particularly noteworthy together. Americans learn to value reliability over excitement, consistency over intensity, and presence over performance. These friendships don't require constant maintenance or scheduled quality time. They simply exist, steady and available, without demanding continual proof of their importance or worth, which creates a foundation that many Americans find more solid and less stressful than the relationships they had before. Slowly, something deeper changes. Americans begin to measure success differently. Days feel complete without constant achievement. Comfort gains value. Presence matters more than speed. This shift does not arrive with a clear moment. It appears quietly, through small choices and calmer reactions. Many people only notice it once they realize how different their priorities feel. The identity transformation is the most profound and least visible part of living in Australia long-term. Americans arrive with deeply ingrained beliefs about what makes life meaningful: achievement, progress, constant improvement, visible success. These beliefs shape everything from daily routines to major life decisions. But Australia operates on different assumptions. Success here includes balance, enjoyment, quality of life, time with people you care about. Achievement matters, but it's not the only thing that matters, or even necessarily the most important thing. This alternative framework challenges Americans to reconsider foundations they've never questioned before. They start asking themselves uncomfortable questions. Why am I working this hard? What am I actually trying to achieve? What do I want my life to feel like, not just look like? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're practical inquiries that reshape daily choices. Americans find themselves turning down opportunities that would have excited them before because the cost to their quality of life isn't worth the professional advancement. They choose time over money, presence over productivity, sustainability over intensity. This doesn't feel like sacrifice. It feels like alignment, finally making choices that match what they actually value rather than what they think they should value. The identity that emerges is often quieter, less ambitious in traditional terms, more grounded in immediate experience rather than future achievement. Many Americans describe feeling more themselves than they ever did before, as if Australia gave them permission to become who they actually are rather than who they thought they needed to be. That permission, once granted, is almost impossible to revoke, which is why so many Americans struggle when they eventually return to environments that don't support this version of themselves they've become.